patience. It might just be the most undervalued skill in our hyper-connected world. But what happens when we look at an old story about a train, a cow, and a frustrated salesman that completely challenges our modern obsession with speed?
That's such an interesting way to frame it. How did you come across this particular story?
Well, I was researching the psychological impact of constant connectivity, and I found this fascinating account of an old branch line train journey. Picture this: one passenger, a salesman with an important meeting, stuck on a creaky train in the middle of nowhere.
Let me guess. Things didn't go exactly according to schedule?
You know what's amazing. The train suddenly stops because there's a cow on the tracks. And the conductor's response is something that would be unthinkable today. He just smiles and says, "They'll have to wait it out."
That's completely different from how we handle delays now. I mean, imagine an airline announcement saying, "Sorry, folks, we're just waiting for some wildlife to move along."
Right? And here's where it gets really interesting. After about 10 minutes, they start moving again, only to stop a couple miles later. The salesman is practically beside himself at this point.
Well, that must have pushed him over the edge. What happened next?
So, get this. It turns out the entire train schedule was actually built to accommodate these kinds of delays. They knew there would be cows or farmers crossing or whatever else might come up in rural life, and they planned for it.
That's fascinating because it speaks to a completely different relationship with time. You know, studies show that our modern intolerance for delays is actually causing serious health issues.
Exactly. Recent research from the American Psychological Association shows that people who experience chronic impatience have a 50% higher risk of developing cardiovascular problems. It's like we're literally stressing ourselves sick over saved minutes.
So what happened to our salesman? Did he miss his appointment?
That's the real kicker. He made it on time. The only thing he accomplished by working himself up was exhausting himself unnecessarily. You know, it reminds me of that ancient wisdom. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty.
And in today's world, we seem to have completely lost that perspective. I mean, when was the last time any of us actually built buffer time into our schedules?
Well, here's something surprising. Companies that have implemented what they call realistic scheduling, basically building in buffer time, like that old train schedule, report up to 30% higher productivity and significantly lower employee burnout rates.
That's really counterintuitive. We tend to think that pushing for maximum efficiency all the time is the way to get better results.
But that's exactly where we're getting it wrong. Studies from the Harvard Business Review show that organizations with more flexible time management actually outperform their rigid counterparts by about 20% in terms of both productivity and innovation.
You know what this reminds me of? That concept about keeping your motor idling instead of stripping your gears.
Exactly. And neuroscience backs this up. When we're constantly in a rush, our brains produce excess cortisol, which actually impairs decision-making and creative thinking. It's like we're sabotaging ourselves in the name of efficiency.
So how do we actually apply this wisdom in a world that seems to demand constant urgency?
Well, research suggests starting with what psychologists call micro buffer zones, adding just 15 to 20% more time to whatever we think a task will take. It's like creating our own modern version of that train's cow time.
That makes sense, but don't you think there's also something deeper here about our relationship with control?
You've hit on something crucial there. Psychology Today recently published a fascinating study showing that our inability to handle delays is often more about our need for control than actual time management.
That really puts our salesman's story in a different light, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And here's what's really interesting. Mindfulness researchers have found that people who practice accepting delays as natural parts of life show significantly lower stress levels and better problem-solving abilities in crisis situations.
So what would you say to someone listening who wants to develop more of that train conductor's patience?
Well, the data suggests three key strategies. First, build in that buffer time we talked about. Second, practice what psychologists call delay reframing, seeing unexpected pauses as opportunities rather than obstacles. And third, remember that, like our salesman, fighting against delays usually just exhausts us without changing the outcome.
Those sound like practical steps people could actually implement.
And here's the most compelling part. A recent longitudinal study showed that people who adopted these practices reported a 40% reduction in daily stress levels and improved performance in both professional and personal relationships.
That's quite a powerful argument for slowing down.
Indeed. And maybe that's the real lesson from our train story. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is just wait for the cow to move.